USIBC. This is our rapid reaction webinar. We're really pleased to have Abhishek from TMT Law Practice. The main purpose of today's webinar is to talk about the TRAI consultation paper that looks to develop policy around allocating spectrum. Of course, the key issue for us is whether or not spectrum is administratively allocated, as well as when and where that spectrum may be auctioned. We're deviating a little bit from our planned agenda because maybe an hour ago, India formally produced its space policy. We have been waiting a long time to hear about that. And so how we're going to structure today's webinar is we're going to ask Abhishek to just give us a very quick and dirty update on the space policy, and then we will toggle to the TRAI consultation paper. In the meantime, Abhishek, why don't you turn the slides off, just because we'll be talking about space policy. And then the way we're going to lay this out is up front, this is going to be recorded as we learn about the policy itself. Then we'll stop the recording and we'll work on internal ideas and how USIBC may want to respond to the consultation paper itself. In the interim, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, come on screen, or type them into the chat. We'll be sure to capture them all. But with that, Abhishek, I just want to thank you for all your support to USIBC. You've been a great knowledge partner in the area of space and other emerging technologies, and I'm really pleased to have you here today. I'm handing it over to you. Tell me about the SpaceCom policy. This is hot off the press, literally. Over to you, sir.
Absolutely, Jay. And I don't think we could have had a more topical introduction to what we intended to speak about today, because one of the aspects that I had set out in the slides that I proposed to share with the members very shortly on the consultation paper was that this, of course, will be this is at the backdrop of the SpaceCom policy that is likely to be soon notified. And whereas it is approved by cabinet about a week ago, but we're still awaiting that, well, that part of the slide will have to be ignored by people because, as Jay just said, hot off the press, we've just had, I got this document about half an hour ago, so it's fairly, it's released to the public domain today. It's not a formal gazetted notification yet, but that's, I guess, a formality. Very quickly, I think for all those who had perhaps seen the earlier version of the SpaceCom policy, the draft version, which came out sometime in late 2020, there were a couple of, I think, disturbing sort of thoughts there. One was this emphasis that, and you know, the language one read of the entire draft seemed to suggest that perhaps foreign capital was not going to be permitted in terms of investment into this domain in India. And perhaps first, the government wanted that when there is a move towards privatization, the emphasis would have been to encourage local Indian companies, some of which have already, of course, done wonders in the startup space and have really put India on the sort of commercial space map, if we had already not done enough through ISRO. But the heartening part of this document is that it's open, it's inviting foreign capital. The definition of non-government entity is very clearly, it sets out, aspects of four heads under which a non-governmental entity can operate, which is a company incorporated under the Companies Act, or a limited liability partnership, or even a trust, or an association of persons or body of individual. Of course, the entity will have to be incorporated in India, but till such time that we hear from the government on whether there is any limitation on the foreign direct investment coming into this sector, till such time that happens, we know that at least at the very minimum, there will be a permission for investing, if not anything else, at least a minority stake, maybe up to 49%. But From what one hears, possibly it could be as much as maybe 74%, but I'm not going to postulate on that, because once that document comes out, we will know for sure. Good part, as I said, reiterate, is that there is no limitation on foreign capital coming in. The other thing is that even from the point of view of an NGE, there's no limitation on where it can operate. It can operate in India. It can operate by providing services outside of India. There is and there is the InSpace, which is the entity that has been set up in 2020 for the promotion of an authorization of activity, commercial space activity in this regard, is going to be tasked with the responsibility of creating the sort of infrastructure and accord authorization for a set of about 9 identified space activities, which is establishment and operation of the space object, launch and launch vehicles, including suborbital launch, establishment and operation of launch pads, establishment and operation of TT&C Earth stations. So it's a fairly wide and open-ended jurisdiction that is given to InSpace to work with industry, both national and overseas, to promote space activities and establish India as a hub of commercial space in times to come. So I do need to go through this document in a little more detail to be able to give further views, but I thought that it's very topical, and I thought it's a great beginning to not just, I think, the future of space in India, but also this rapid response webinar that we are currently doing. So I thought I'll give that introduction and then move over to what we're really here to talk about, which is the consultation process that has been initiated by the TRAI.
Great, thank you for that. I mean, that's good news. Those are topics, we've been advocating and working with the Indian government and on those issues, foreign direct investment and what Indian entities mean. It's a term, so it sounds like this is a positive outcome. Of course, we will dive into it, and I will talk with members and maybe some of our partners on the line here if we want to do another rapid response webinar that sort of delves a little deeper into the details of the new space policy. So with that, let's see if our members have any general questions on the SpaceCom policy. Hands raised, come on screen. Questions in chat, going once, going twice. Well, let's oh, there we go. Cheryl, over to you, sir.
Cheryl,
we're having trouble hearing you. Cheryl, can you drop out and come back in? It's garbled, and then we'll get that question in a moment. That was curious.
It was coming from outer space, Jay.
Yeah. Over to you,
okay,
sir.
I'm back.
Question.
Sorry,
yes. Now
did I sound like?
You sounded like an extraterrestrial. Now you sound like a terrestrial. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jay. Is it okay now?
It's perfect, Cheryl. We can hear you.
All right, very good. So great timing, Jay. Congratulations. It's impeccable timing. Abhishek, so have you had a chance to look at the policy, or are you?
No, Cheryl, it just came half an hour ago, and while I was just moving to get the slides ready for this webinar, is when it flashed on my email. So I thought that I will have a quick look at it and just go through just very salient points. So I need to go through it in a little more detail before I can perhaps comment upon it. But from the looks of it, from the initial quick read, some of the issues that you and I had discussed that were issues for the industry in general seem to have been removed. So I think it's certainly a great step ahead. But I after this and maybe over the course of the day, I'll come back separately to you with a little more detailed inputs on this.
Okay, perhaps you can talk about the timing, the sequence of events to follow. The policy has been. Does it need to go to Parliament for approval?
No. So
Does
what
there
happens is,
need to be
since
follow-up regulations? What's the timing on this?
yeah, so in terms of that, what typically happens is, since this is not part of the legislative mandate, the policy is in a purely executive fiat. So all that it needed to go through in terms of the internal requirements was cabinet approval, which it had accorded last week. And now it was just we were all waiting for it to be notified. Now it has been formally. It should be gazetted, which I think it soon will be. But more importantly, from here on onwards, the various actors who have been identified in this policy and along with their specific roles, which is in space, NSIL, and ISRO, they will now have to come up with specific structures, applications, processes, so that the authorization process that the policy has advocated and has given a go ahead to, that can really be put into action, into executive mode. So I think that's now, to my mind, with the release of this policy, and because all of these actors are government actors and they would possibly already be privy to a lot of what is going on, I'm sure that work would have been happening in tandem, in parallel. So I don't think there's going to be too much of a waste of time. Everyone was looking out for this policy as a initiator so that they can try and achieve what they wanted to set out to achieve. But yeah, what we will have to look out for is a specific guideline on foreign direct investment as to what are the permissible limits, and B, on the specific application process for getting authorizations in India.
Yeah, great.
Great.
Cheryl, in the chat is a link to the document. I want to add just two quick things in my scan through. One, it's not very long, not a lot of content, which is interesting because a lot of the other documents are very deep and dense. Two, and this I think is helpful, it creates very clear roles and responsibilities between ISRO, InSpace, and the Department of Space. That's always been, excuse me, it's always been an issue of who does what, and now you have a policy that very clearly demarks those roles and responsibilities. And the third thing is, and if I read this right, ISRO is going to make data available of 5 meter and larger open freely to everyone. And I think that very much follows the US model of Landsat. It's something that India hasn't done in the past. And now Israel will make a lot of its data available to the general public, is the way I read that. So over to you.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to flag, I've also looked at the document, just scanning it, and the question about whether we would be required to use Indian orbital resources, I think that has also been addressed, and I believe the document, at least at first glance, appears to say that we are free to use ITU filings through non-Indian administrations
That's correct.
as well. So that's a significant modification from the prior policy.
Yes, yeah. Correct. Absolutely.
Great. So thank you. Any other questions on the space policy from our membership? Okay. All right, Abhishek, back over to you to the main stage, so to speak. The purpose of today's webinar is to talk through TRAI's consultation and how USIBC and others may respond to it. So with that, Abhishek, if you want to share your screen, and we'll hand that back over to you, sir.
Great. I have my colleague Siddhant. I think I'm just requesting him to put the PPT here.
Yeah.
Great. Is it visible to everyone?
It is. And can you make it full screen, please? There we go. Perfect.
Sure. Yeah. So I think just go to slide number 2, please, Siddhant, as everyone does know what we are talking about here. So, folks, TRAI has commenced this consultation. It's a round to seek industry comments, primarily in view of the fact that TRAI received, and that's how sort of things happen in as for people from also, I'm just repeating for people who are familiar with this and for people who are not. This is the first time that we are telling them that typically TRAI has powers of recommendation under the TRAI Act, and that recommendation initiative sort of commences with a request made by the concerned ministry. In this case, it's the Department of Telecom. They sent a letter seeking recommendations from TRAI, primarily around determination of, first, of course, the demand for space-based communication services, and then to figure out what should be the quantum of spectrum in each band, which is required to be put to auction. It's of course the underlying premise of DOT's request was that they are working towards, they intend to move towards a situation where spectrum will be allocated on the basis of auction. So a lot of the background and the approach of this consultation paper has been taken from that perspective. It is, however, important to note that because a specific set of queries have been set out to TRAI and therefore translated into this consultation paper to invite comments, the TRAI specifically has asked the question as to whether industry thinks that the best way of actually allocating spectrum is auction, or is it any other authorization or any sort of other third perspective that could be adopted. So it's not a done deal that this has to be through auction. The option is still available, and certainly people are encouraged to give reasons for why auction should not be the preferred choice, and that authorization is certainly a much better option. Now the point is, as I said, the impending notification of Spacecom policy can be ignored as a second point in this slide, because now that is moot. Interestingly, the draft telecommunications bill that was circulated late last year, and which is in the works, they're sort of reassessing that aspect. The telecom bill did provide for multiple methods of spectrum assignment. Auction was one of the methods mentioned, but it provided for administrative assignment, primarily for spectrum for government functions or for purposes in view of public interest for certain satellite-based services. Now, the point is, once there is a recognition that administrative assignment is an alternative for allocation, whether it is for the government or for the private sector, certainly there is a thaw in the thinking of the concerned ministries that this is certainly an option that is available for them to consider. The right arguments will have to be made to push for this. The other reason for asking the TRAI to look into this is there's a huge expectation of growth of 5G. We're moving towards already a discussion on 6G, new age technologies of IoT, etc. So the overall thought process is that not only these new technologies, but also for increased broadband connectivity, navigation, disaster management, remote sensing capabilities, there is a need for a broad set of recommendations to be made by the TRAI, which is the regulator and which is the concerned expert body that can actually come out with those recommendations. The other interesting part is that just perhaps maybe less than a week after this consultation paper came out, a separate consultation, though not sent out to a larger group in the form of how TRAI sort of advertises its consultation process, but certainly the DOT had released another short document for public consultation, where it is intending to open up the sector for satellite phones. And of course, that is tied in with the TRAI consultation process, but it was not made necessarily a part of it. It was released separately. And that document also, Jay, if you can put it on the chat, and if you do not have it, then I'll shortly put it in the course of this session. Now, the point is, the current licensing framework, the manner in which it operates, the government of India assigns spectrum for gateway links and for user links, just for the purposes of understanding, if one can break this up into like an uplinking and a downlinking sort of perspective. Typically, in relation to satellite-based broadcasting services, the frequency spectrum requires to be assigned only for the forward link, or the sort of really for the downlinking process where the user receives that particular signal. For the uplinking part, that's currently, even though there is a policy for uplinking, but that's not a mandatory condition as it currently subsists in terms of the policy. So therefore, it would be, the point is, the question that is asked is that would it be appropriate to assign spectrum for gateway links and user links separately to give flexibility to the stakeholders, or to assign spectrum for gateway links and user links in a bundled manner? That's one of the questions that has been put out for consultation. Next slide, please, Siddhant. This is just a reiteration what I just said, that the implied reference indicated by the references to DOT is that that they are likely to look at the allocation through auction, but I'll just shortly come to that. There are a host of technical issues that have been raised, and the point is, the TRAI itself recognizes that perhaps there is a need for suggesting more equitable modes of assignment, specifically in view of the technology restrictions with the use of satellite infrastructure. See, typically, one of the reasons why terrestrial telecommunication spectrum is auctioned is because it provides that exclusivity. It is because there is a possibility of slicing up that particular sort of spectrum and allocating that particular frequency to only an identified bidder who's sort of succeeds. And of course, the flexible use of spectrum is encouraged because they want to offer multiple services within the same frequency band. The range of satellites, whether it's a GEO, LEO, MEO, will also perhaps determine what exactly will be the inherent properties of the frequency band, how much of flexible use there can be within the technical qualities of the frequency. How do you whether you allocate there are going to be different conditions for allocation of the lower frequency band, such as C-band, which is less susceptible to interference from adverse weather, or the higher frequency band is Ka band, which is prone to what's referred to as rain fade. Are there going to be similar conditions? Are there going to be differential graded sort of deployment needs, etc.? So all of those are technical issues. I'm not qualified to comment really on it. All of you who are business and commercial and technical people will probably be in a better position to sort of look at it. But just to highlight that there are these various sets of technical and commercial issues that have been highlighted there. Now, moving to the aspect of auctions, the consultation paper, Siddhant, next slide, please. The consultation paper looks to the global precedents on assignment of spectrum. Typically, C-band, Ku band, Ka band has been assigned administratively. There have been some exceptions, but those exceptions specifically, there have been examples given of the US, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia that had conducted auctions for frequency spectrum, but US and Brazil certainly, that allocation happened along with the orbital slots, but these have now reversed to their methodology to an administrative assignment. The point is that because there is a requirement of international coordination for operation of satellite systems, the requirement of allocation of frequency and orbital resources, the filings in the ITU, all of those aspects require that a specific country, and this is of course the voice of the industry that is not only been heard by the DOT and TRAI, but is also likely to be further voiced in the response to this consultation paper, that you cannot treat satellite spectrum at the same level as terrestrial. These are apples and oranges. You can't necessarily say that just because you're auctioning telecom terrestrial spectrum, you must also auction satellite spectrum. Of course, inputs have been sought on the different kinds of services, whether it's fixed satellite services, mobile, broadband satellite services, how those have to be dealt with. Do they merit differential treatment in terms of assignment? All of those issues have been highlighted as possible aspects to be considered in the course of this consultation. Next slide, please, Siddhant. Now, just this is us. We've highlighted some issues with the auction of satellite spectrum. It is a shared resource. It cannot be partitioned into large or small chunks for exclusive use. There are no territorial limits for the spectrum usage. Satellite spectrum is shared amongst multiple operators in different orbital slots. Our argument is that the auction will lead to fragmentation of spectrum and will reduce its efficacy and economic value, and it could create gatekeepers with chunks of spectrum and reduce competition in the market. So it is certainly not something that we are recommending to proceed with. We've just set out some of the issues that where TRAI has sought inputs, the technical inputs with regard to appropriate frequency bands, whether these should be looked at for different types of licensed communication and broadcasting services. What would be the eligibility criteria seeking to participate? Should there be flexible use in the frequency range of 27.5 to 28.5 gigahertz? And what should be the associated terms and conditions, including eligibility conditions? What would be the valuation mechanism for charging user spectrum? Let's assume that it is not to be auction. Is there a mechanism that can be suggested by the industry, can be looked at by TRAI and the DOT for how fees should or charges should be levied? What should be, of course, the methodology for the assignment? Should it be auction-based? Should it be administrative? Should it be any other? And it is, in case it is decided to do auction, the gateway link frequency, should separate auction be conducted for each types of services? Of course, they've said whatever else other design models of user links, including terms and conditions that you could come up with in terms of suggestions. The one aspect that I think is important for me to sort of highlight very quickly, because it is something that I think this group would also want to know specifically, whether you're lawyers or non-lawyers. One of the key points that has been highlighted in the media as an argument being taken by people who are favoring auctions is that because of the entire fiasco that happened in the first decade towards 2008-2009, resulting in cancellation of all the spectrum that was allocated on a first come first served basis by the Supreme Court of India. There are a couple of sort of mandated thoughts or observations in that judgment, which are being used to say that, look, when you are allocating any public resource, auction is the only option. But very few people perhaps know that very close on heels of that judgment, the government actually sought a precedential reference, an opinion from the Supreme Court by a bench that was larger than the bench that decided that case, to say that is that particular decision only a binding precedent to the extent that it relates to telecommunication terrestrial spectrum in the facts of that particular case, or is it something which is a binding precedent for allocation of all public resources? So Supreme Court, in a fairly detailed analysis, came to the conclusion that that judgment is only binding precedent in relation to the facts of that case. It was given in the facts of that case. It was necessitated in view of there being a completely arbitrary process being put into motion for allocation of terrestrial spectrum. But if there is allocation to be made of any other public resource, then there is no thumb rule where it has to be auction as a default. Auction is one of the methods. It is a good method. It's a time-tested method. It is a method which gets in more money for the exchequer. But the policymaker, the executive, has to necessarily look at what are the balancing public interest conditions, what are the balancing technical conditions, what are the overall conditions of that particular public resource before deciding whether or not to opt for auction. Now, of course, the industry needs to make out that case in response to this consultation paper. But from what we have heard, especially because of the fact that the bulk of utilization, at least to begin with, in terms of Satcom and satellite technology, is going to be for disaster management. It's going to be for education. It's going to be for the social sector. It is going to be for those areas that are not connected, the last mile connectivity. It's not necessary that this is going to be a money spinner in the short or even the medium term. It's only when you have proliferation of user terminals, when people want to start getting satellite broadband connectivity, when it becomes a ubiquitous source of broadband connectivity, that really speaking, the companies that are making these investments are going to see the money. And it's not, and there is the concomitant public interest sort of argument is that with that particular beam spreading to the extent that it does, you're going to be having multiple ancillary benefits in the areas of telemedicine, education, disaster management, and those and like sort of aspect. The important part is going to be, can the industry make out a case for being able to offer in a sort of, I guess, 5-year, 7-year, whatever period is discussed between the industry and government, access to such services for an individual consumer at rates that are competitive with terrestrial networks. If that part of the commercial puzzle can be solved, then I think certainly a case is made out for not going for auction. I think that's pretty much it from my end. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Abhishek. Always a very thorough and insightful presentation. Thank you. Siddhant, if you want to stop sharing your screen, that would be great. We can move to the question and answer portion of our conversation. I see, Cheryl, you have a question. Why don't we begin with you?
Thanks, Jay, and thanks, Abhishek. So picking up on the point you just made about the Supreme Court, and the preference for auctions, how do you read this document, the TRAI's consultation? Is auctions already baked into the policy, or is there room for them to say auctions may not be appropriate for satellite spectrum?
So
how much
as I
flexibility?
mentioned, as I mentioned in the course of my presentation, the point is, while the underlying, I think, sense or direction that DOT wanted to give to this consultation was that they are intending to go for auction. However, they have raised that question to the TRAI to consider on the basis of its own research and on the basis of inputs that it receives from the industry and the various stakeholders, as to whether TRAI thinks that it's a good idea to go for auction or not. But even assuming that TRAI does say that for these reasons, auction is not a great idea in this regard, and subject to these sort of conditionalities, you can go in for a administrative allocation, the DOT still has the option of rejecting that part of the recommendation and still going ahead with auction. So it's while it is not baked into this document that it is auction but no other option, but that seems currently, the tilt, at least of the government, of the DOT, seems to be going in favor of the auction, but there is no finality to this.
And likewise, Abhishek, in theory, if TRAI supported auctions, DOT could come back and change its position as well as the government, correct? Because nothing TRAI says in this regard is binding. This is part of its recommendation role as a regulator. So this is not, TRAI is not the decision maker, the DOT is.
TRAI is not the decision maker.
Yeah.
DOT will take the final call.
I believe my colleague Haas Market wants to make a comment, but let me just say that we intend to file, a fairly strong comment that auctions are not appropriate for satellite spectrum, and we will, explore that issue more fully in our comments to be filed in the next 2 weeks.
Thanks. I do want to reference that the deadline is coming up fast. It's May 4th, if I have that offhand.
That's correct. Yeah.
There is precedent to ask for extensions, and TRAI typically is open to that, but just be wary of the date and the need to ask for an extension if one is valid. Haas, over to you, and then we will go to Amit from AT&T.
Thank you. Thank you for the useful presentation. Really, really, really great. One comment. I mean, it's almost like as if we see there's a shift in the regulatory bodies in India where TRAI is becoming more vocal, because over the years it has always been obviously ISRO, but now we're starting to see we're seeing TRAI playing a greater role in satellite spectrum. Do you see this as a trend? I mean, like, is there a power shift within the Indian government? The other point is about where do the economists, experts reside in the Indian government? Who are the people who know about auctions and understand the economics of auction? And the reason I say that is that track record in prior auctions, India is one of those countries that there is more spectrum available than has been licensed, and that's because of badly designed auctions. So in the past, in the mobile spectrum. So where does that expertise reside within the Indian government? Thank you.
Sure. Has very quickly, and I think part of these things are sort of kind of connected. The regulator TRAI is supposed to possess the expertise to be able to evaluate not just the technical aspects, but also give input from an economics standpoint. Of course, it takes the inputs from the industry, it takes the inputs from the Telecom Commission, it looks at the past record in terms of how to price spectrum, how to value it, etc. But yes, typically the input from a valuation standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, comes very often from TRAI. On to your first question, why is one seeing kind of further participation by TRAI? Any aspect has that concerns telecommunication. So to the extent that we are looking at Satcom, TRAI will be brought into bear to comment upon, as a regulator in the telecommunication sector, to comment upon and to formulate, perhaps to assist with formulation of policy, to give recommendations where it relates to telecommunication. And if you perhaps you would have already followed, the only other prior sort of instance where there was that telecom element of a synergy with space, that is in the case of your maritime and air connectivity rules, FMAC rules of 2018, that those were also born out of the recommendations given by TRAI. So wherever there is that element of telecommunications, TRAI will be coming in. If it is purely a space-based aspect, then you will look to more of in-space and ISRO, etc. For example, when we had the geospatial guidelines being notified, that was a mandate of the Department of Science and Technology. So it was notified by under the aegis of that department. So depending upon what aspect and who has been allocated that business, that's where it's going to come in. The policy document that I just mentioned right at the beginning of this, the new Spacecom policy that's been sort of put in public domain today, very clearly says that in-space will be the nodal sort of entity to coordinate for all authorizations. So one will see as to how that plays out in sort of reality. But they are further to also the document that was released in October of last year. The government is trying to create some sort of a single window clearance at least where it concerns authorization and commencement of businesses. So we will see a synergy amongst all these departments. But just to answer your question, the role of the TRAI will always be there when it comes to aspects of telecom.
Thank you. And if I might add, in terms of balance of power, what I've seen in the last 15 years or so is that the Department of Telecommunications did not really have a strong satellite play. They did some licensing, but they didn't really always talk about it. And if you look at previous telecom policies, Satcom never played a major role in broadband or universal service. What I've seen in the last couple of years is a recognition within the Department of Telecommunications of the importance of Satcom. And I've heard and seen more activity from their side, in particular in the last 24, 36 months. They've been going through a process of Satcom reforms. And so you see a lot more activity coming from DOT, but all, as Abhishek said, predicated under the basic allocation rules that the government's had in place for several decades now. Amit, over to you, sir. Thank you for your patience.
Ajay, thanks, and compliment Abhishek for a summarized and good, you can say, concise version of what this entire consultation is all about. I wasn't able to go through this consultation paper, keeping the length in mind. So thanks for that summarized version. Just wanted to have few facts just for the people. I think first, I think it's the thinking within the DOT itself. Since 2012, I think the thinking is that any spectrum that needs to be auctioned, given to the private entities, be auctioned. And this is the same way even the microwave spectrum, they haven't been able to decide on the microwave auction allocation methodology, even while the recommendations were given by TRAI back in 2014. It still is an limbo, and the microwave allocations still continue to be on a provisional basis as such. Internal has decided kind of auction, but they have not been able to finalize on the methodology per se. Same is with the space. Same is with the satellite spectrum. If you think about satellite spectrum, whatever has been assigned to all the space segment or operators, it is just on the basis of provisional allocation. There's been no final allocation per se. It is all on the basis of provisional policy, which has been continuing till date. And in this reference, I think this consultation paper, they have made up mind, DOT has made up mind that they are trying to auction, and then they have sent this consultation to TRAI. The other issue is that even the industry is divided on this. There is a major player who actually bats for auction. There are others who are actually going in for administrative assignment, which is kind of gives a different kind of a perspective, wherein not all the people, all the stakeholders are on the same plane, as against microwave, where people were in the same plane, wherein they wanted all to be allocated administratively. So I think this is where the play is, and since there will be divergence of opinion, it will be critical to see how TRAI comes up with this, because even then, if it goes to TRAI, it will be a round of reference back coming over, and it will be a long thing. I see it as a long, this decision taking longer than we expect. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Any other questions or comments from our membership? Okay, so we're going to turn to the next portion of our conversation here, and I'm going to stop the recording. I want to, before I do that though, I want to thank Abhishek for your insight. I want to thank you for your leadership and your knowledge, expertise, and look forward to having you work with USIBC and our members on other issues.
Thank you so much, Jay.